Hey, it's Stephen Middleton on July 4th, 2022. I'm traveling and I wanted to offer a historian's reflections on the 4th of July. 4th of July is Independence Day for the United States when the colonies declared their separation from Great Britain. I know that people have all kinds of reflections about the 4th of July, and I want to offer mine. Now, I haven't sketched anything out. I'm going to just share for a moment and see what comes out. And the first thing that I want to say is that on July 4th, 1776, a new birth of freedom came into the world at the time. Now I want to stay here for just a minute because I want you to understand that much of the world in 1776 was not free. No matter what continent people were on at the time. People in Europe were not free at the time. People in Asia were not free at the time. People in Africa were not free at the time. So when the colonists declared their freedom in 1776, this was a new birth of freedom for the entire world. The second thing that I want to say about freedom, as it was announced in 1776, is that it was a new spin on this freedom. The colonists relied on the thinking of some early philosophers like Hobbes and the like. That's true. And those individuals began to talk about natural law and natural rights and the law of God. And what the colonists were beginning to recognize is that there was and is such a thing as higher law. This law supersedes any law of civil government. This law supersedes the thinking of man. This law reaches into the heavens. So in the late 18th century then, 1776, the colonists were touching upon something that was very spiritual. They were touching on something that was very divine. They were touching on something that was true and that will always be true. So therefore, the freedom that was announced in 1776 was not restricted to a certain breed of men. It was not restricted to men. It was not restricted to sex. It was not restricted to individuals of European ancestry. Because if they had stuck to that, then the birth of freedom, this ring of freedom that they were feeling and sensing at the time would have been so inadequate for the stand that they were taking in the world. They were taking a stand in the world for freedom, the freedom that would touch everyone on planet Earth. Many of these individuals had become wisdom thinkers, even if it was only for a moment, even if it was only for a year, even if it was only for 10 years. They were wisdom thinkers. They were touching into that deeper wisdom, that wisdom which truly is the wisdom of God. Now, I know some people would say, well, look, what about women? Well, it's true. Women were not totally free at the time, but the ring of freedom in 1776 was big enough, was large enough to encompass women. Some people would say, well, what about Africans who were in America at the time? I want to say two things about this. The first thing that I want to say about this is that Africans at the time chose to fight for the liberation of the colonies. Many of them, they were articulate on this subject. You can read their writings from this period. They said that they were fighting not just for the liberation of the colonies from Britain so that Europeans would be free. They were fighting for the liberation of the colonies from Britain because they wanted to secure their freedom. And that's what they told the colonists. that they were fighting for their freedom. In fact, Africans began to tell the colonists this before the colonists announced their independence. As early as the 1760s, when colonists like James Otis and others were writing about natural rights, Africans were writing about natural rights, were relying on natural rights, were suing in the courts, citing natural rights to argue for their freedom before 1776. So therefore, the Africans who fought for this country were fighting for their liberation as well, because they believed that they too would become free. And I'm happy to say that George Middleton, some people say that he led the regiment in the Continental Army called the Bucks of America, was also fighting for our freedom. I want to say this also, my third point about freedom, is that freedom is not static. You know, you don't get freedom and say, now I'm free. Freedom is something that evolves. Freedom is something that you nurture. Freedom is like a relationship. Freedom is like being in a family. You just don't get it once and say, I got it now, and that is over. This freedom of ours in America has been nurtured over the years in spite of what anyone can say about it. We are freer today than we have ever been before, but the evolution of this freedom started immediately following independence. You know, and I'll stop here with this one. I'm recalling now a statement from Benjamin Franklin, who was at the Constitutional Convention in 1787. They had written this Constitution, and I'm going to tell you now, they didn't know if this country would survive or not. They had no clue if this country would survive or not. They had no idea, because this experiment in constitutional government had never worked, had never been attempted anywhere in the world at the time. And as the Constitutional Convention was closing, Benjamin Franklin looked at a painting that hung in Philadelphia Hall. And he said to his colleagues at the convention that, you know, day in and day out, I looked at that picture as the sun went down. And I wonder to myself, is that a rising sun or is that a setting sun? Franklin concluded that it was a rising sun. And that's what I say about the freedom that was announced in 1776. That freedom was a rising sun. That freedom is a rising sun. We have evolved to where we are to now. And I'm going to tell you one last thing. The evolution of our freedom is not over, and it will never be over. You know, we saw the Supreme Court's decision on Friday, I think it was June 24th, where the court reversed Roe versus Wade. Now, I don't know where you stand on this. I'm not political. I'm not trying to be political here. But you know something? I would say that it was a sad day in America that those justices could make a decision for the masses. Here is my prediction. I liken that decision to Scott versus Sanford in 1857. Scott versus Sanford was one of the worst decisions that the U.S. Supreme Court had made to that date. If you don't know that decision, look it up. Scott versus Sanford, the court said that persons of African ancestry were not citizens and could not ever become citizens of the United States of America. The court was wrong. The court erred. And it took several decades, but the United States Congress righted that wrong when it passed the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution. The 14th Amendment then thus declared that all persons born in the United States, all persons born in the United States, not just Africans, that's any individual who ends up in this, all persons born in the United States are citizens of the United States and of the states thereof. It also said that those persons, citizens, have a right to the privileges and immunities that comes with that citizenship. Those persons have a right to due process of law. Those persons have a right to equal protection of the law. In my prediction, I'm not sure, I'm 68 years old now, I'm not sure if I'll live to see it, but my prediction is that the Congress of the United States eventually will pass a law that reverses the court's decision not a law, pardon me, will pass the constitutional amendment. Because a law, a statute would not do it. A statute is subject to interpretation. I predict that a constitutional amendment will occur sometimes. Now, I don't know where you stand on this issue. Notice I am not talking about whether one thing is right or wrong, but people have a right to choose what happens in their life and not a body appointed by the President of the United States, even though it was confirmed they were confirmed by the Senate. Well, I was wondering if I could share this and be so candid with you on this 4th of July. I talked about it with my daughter. She said, hey, if that's what you think, that's what you think. You have a right to what you think. You can share whatever you want to think. And maybe some people would be inspired by it. Hey, I got to say one more thing to you. You also have the right in the United States to become as healthy as you want to be. You also have the right to decide if proper nutrition would reverse some of your chronic diseases. You also have the right to pursue financial fitness if that's important to you. One of the things that I find disheartening today, more disheartening than anything else, is that so many people have been convinced that they cannot achieve a level of financial fitness in this country. Government will not do that for you. Government will not protect your physical health. Actually, government will not even protect your emotional health. If you deal with government, it'll probably take it away. So those are my reflections on this 4th of July, the reflections of a historian on the 4th of July, 2022. Enjoy.